All right, Colts Nation, I am back, and I'm going to tell you what, I think that I have a really, really good one for you today, and I want to talk a little bit about Shane Steichen, and I do know that the title of this video is a little bit provocative, so I want to kind of get some stuff out of the way before I just start flying into the body of this episode, right? Now, of course, I am incredibly confident in Shane Steichen. In fact, I am completely ecstatic that Shane Steichen is the head coach. For me, this hire was absolutely electric by the Indianapolis Colts. From working with Philip Rivers, one of the all-time great brains in this game, which he was, by the way, kind enough to bring to Indianapolis. I don't think Rivers gets enough credit for that. But besides the point, right? To what Shane Steichen was able to do to aid Justin Herbert in that spectacular rookie season of his, of course, being the offensive coordinator in Philly during an absolutely next-level leap by Jalen Hurts this last season, one that no one thought can happen on the level that it did. It seemed practically impossible. Everyone was talking about how Jalen Hurts couldn't throw, right? For a team that is drafted rather, a young developmental quarterback in Anthony Richardson, of course, I would challenge you to find me a better head coach on paper than Shane Steichen. And thus brings me to the topic of today's episode, because I'll tell you what, maybe not a better candidate, but I can find you one that's close on paper. His name is no other than Frank Reich. So I want to take some time to kind of break down what I mean by that, because the parallels between Shane Steichen and Frank Reich run deep. So I want to start the show by telling you that story, because it is a fascinating one, particularly as a Colts fan. Now, of course, there are differences between the two, which I will get into on the back end of the show after I share the story with you. But really the point of this video, this episode, is to raise discussion that I feel has not been raised much in the Colts community. Now, this definitely is not a negative piece at all. If you can't tell by the smile on my face, I am excited. But it's an explorative one for sure. And when you take that approach, you are bound to find out some things that you don't love. But this channel right here is all about furthering the discussion around these Indianapolis Colts, making the Colts community a better place to be, right? I try to stay objective, while of course I do acknowledge my obvious biases from time to time. So if everything I just laid out is something that's down your alley, welcome, you're in the right place. My name is Justin. This is the Ride in the Bench Colts cast. I make content about the Colts specifically for Colts fans. If you are returning, by the way, welcome back. Very grateful for you. I ask a few things of everyone that's here. One, most importantly, just enjoy the episode. I make this for your enjoyment. I'm out here trying to get better. Each and every time I make an episode, I feel like I do. And then, of course, if you're enjoying it, the easiest thing you can do to help me out is just shoot the video a like. That's going to help me get out to as many Colts fans as possible. And then if you want to stick around for the journey, I'm going to be making Colts content like for such a long time that you're not even going to know what to do with me, right? So you could go ahead and subscribe if you want to be a part of that journey. But that's it on the intro, because I want to get into the body of this episode. Let's start by taking a trip down memory lane, because I think a lot of people, when they think about the parallels between the Shane Steichen hire as head coach of the Indianapolis Colts and the Frank Reich hire, they're thinking about their roles as the offensive coordinator of the Philadelphia Eagles. But what some may not realize is that what we've seen transpire in recent years in Indianapolis, as far as the coaching end of things goes, has really been something that's brewing since around the year 2008, right? So now some of you that may be more informed about the Colts, and from what I've seen in the comments section over here, by the way, there are a number of you, which I'm very grateful that you're enjoying my page of all the pages you could be enjoying. Just bear with me, right? We got to catch everyone else up with us, right? I promise I will work this back into why the Colts can expect different results from Shane Steichen than we got from Reich. Just trust me, I'll get there. But I do want to tell the story because it's awesome, right? So 2008, right? Let's take what was that, 15 years ago now. A guy by the name of Tony Dungy retires as the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts after an incredible career, leaving the Colts without a head coach for the first time in quite a while. Now, he is replaced by a gentleman by the name of Jim Caldwell. Now, Jim Caldwell, having been the offensive coordinator under Tony Dungy, promotes a guy who was already on the staff by the name of Frank Reich to be the new quarterbacks coach. This is back in 2008. Now, long story short, Caldwell and the remainder of that staff end up getting dismissed after that horrific 2-14 season in 2011, right? Where we are all subjected to seeing Curtis Painter as our starting quarterback. One of my least favorite Colts of all time, may I add, but he did ultimately end up leading us to our knight in shining armor, right? The scar that Indianapolis Colts fans will have forever. He who shall not be named, right? Now, mostly, I'm not naming him because he's not really relevant to the episode, right? I'll love the guy forever. I'm talking about Andrew Luck, of course, for those of you who couldn't, connect the dots, right? So from that time in Indianapolis, that 2-14 season, Frank Reich goes on to become the wide receivers coach under Ken Whisenhunt in Arizona. Now, this is bad timing for Frank Reich, I will admit, because Arizona ends up in a state of disarray, right? They're trying to transition from those Kurt Warner years. If anyone remembers, by the way, maybe some of you are young, but I know some of you are a little older as well. Tell me that Kurt Warner Arizona Cardinals offense from 2008 to 2010, prime Larry Fitzgerald, Anquan Bolden, so on and so forth, wasn't the great ones that you've ever seen. One of the great ones you've ever seen, excuse me. Regardless, they're trying to transition from those years in Arizona. Whisenhunt ends up getting fired and taking the job as offensive coordinator of a little team formerly known as the San Diego Chargers. They have since moved to Los Angeles for the youngins out there, and he brings Frank Reich with him. So the Chargers end up doing well, and they immediately, under Ken Whisenhunt, become one of the top 5 offenses in the NFL immediately. Now, this earns Ken Whisenhunt the head coaching position for our fellow AFC South counterparts, the Tennessee Titans. Now, his departure, or rather in his departure, Frank Reich gets promoted to become the offensive coordinator of the Chargers. And now is where things start to get interesting. They're starting to heat up, right? This is where the Colts fans would take interest, right? I told you I would bring it back. So, Frank Reich brings in a guy. This is great, by the way. This is great. Brings in a guy by the name of Shane Steichen to become the offensive quality control coach of the Chargers in 2014. Now, Steichen ends up working under Frank Reich alongside another guy by the name of Nick Sirianni. Have you ever heard of that name before? Nick Sirianni's the quarterback's coach, right? So you're starting to figure out what's happening here, right? You have Frank Reich as the offensive coordinator. You have Shane Steichen as the offensive quality control coach. And you have Nick Sirianni as the quarterback's coach, right? These are all guys related to the Indianapolis Colts. So 2016 comes along. Frank Reich ends up getting fired as the offensive coordinator of the Chargers, right? He moves on to Philadelphia. Now, who is hired to replace Frank Reich? This is, again, fascinating stuff to me. This is why I'm so excited about this episode. I hope you find this, by the way, as interesting as I find it, because if not, I'm talking to myself. So, who replaces Frank Reich as the offense coordinator in 2016? Ready? Ken Whisenhunt, the same guy who Frank Reich had originally replaced as the offensive coordinator, gets rehired for the same job, again, being the offensive coordinator of the Chargers. Now, Ken Whisenhunt promotes Shane Steichen to become the quarterback coach and then moves Nick Sirianni over to become the wide receiver coach. Now, we all know, by the way, what happens with Frank Reich after, because now it starts to bring us to modern, not that this isn't all modern times, right? But starts to bring us to some more modern times, right? Frank Reich goes to Philly as the offensive coordinator under Doug Peterson, wins a Super Bowl against the Patriots with Nick Foles as the offensive quarterback, right? Which ultimately leads us to the year 2018, where Frank Reich gets hired as the head coach of our beloved Indianapolis Colts. That's, of course, after Josh McDaniels, that fucking snake, backs out of the job basically overnight, right? Now, Frank Reich brings Nick Sirianni from the Chargers, who is working with Shane Steichen, to be the new offensive coordinator of the Indianapolis Colts. And again, he was working under Frank Reich with Shane Steichen with the Chargers, right? So as this is happening, that very same Chargers team that's starting to lose all of these pieces is falling apart offensively, or so it seems, right? You got Phillip Rivers, who is aging, Ken Whisenhunt, who is failing, ultimately leading Whisenhunt to be fired as the offensive coordinator of the Chargers in 2019 after they finish as one of the bottom 3 offenses in football. This is mid-season. Now, based off of everything that we have established so far in this episode, who do you think takes over for Ken Wisenhunt as the offensive coordinator of the Chargers, right? I'll give you a second. You guessed it. Shane Steichen. Oh, this is great, right? Shane Steichen becomes the interim offensive coordinator to finish out the 2019 season for the Chargers. Now, replacing Wisenhunt in the same role on the same team with the same quarterback in Phillip Rivers as Frank Reich did in the year 2013, now 6 years later. And the Chargers under Steichen with an aging Rivers to finish that season end up finishing as a top 5 offense in the league. That's, of course, not in its entirety, but from the time he took over to the end of the season. Now, he ultimately gets, Shane Steichen this is, the full-time job as the offensive coordinator next season. And that, I mean, and then my brain right now. And then the Chargers let Rivers walk. And now he ends up being the quarterback for the Colts under Reich and Sirianni as the offensive coordinator, reuniting, right? I mean, come on. Now, while this is happening, Shane Steichen is coaching a rookie by the name of Justin Herbert. You ever heard of the guy, right? Long story short, this rando rookie quarterback goes on to have one of the greatest rookie seasons of any quarterback in the history of the NFL. Now, following that rookie season, Indianapolis has tons of success as well. So Nick Sirianni, the offensive coordinator under Frank Reich, ends up being hired as the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, which, by the way, of course, is who Frank Reich was the offensive coordinator for before he ended up being hired by the Colts, right? And now we're back to the obvious where Shane Steichen comes from the Chargers, right? Not fired, comes from the Chargers. Nick Sirianni recruits him. Now Shane Steichen is his offensive coordinator. Shane Steichen, Nick Sirianni make the Super Bowl with the Eagles, just like Frank Reich, except this time they so happen to lose it by 3 points on what is essentially a pass interference penalty. Hate to make excuses, but that wasn't a great call. And obviously that was a spectacular game, right? Now that brings us to the current day where Shane Steichen is the head coach of the Colts. Now, come on, tell me that is not an incredible story. Now, I don't want to sound arrogant here, but you are not getting that on any other Colts channel. You cannot get that anywhere. No one else is bringing that to you but me. Hopefully I didn't just turn you off in bringing that up, right? But regardless, now I want to transition from that story into what the hell this has to do with the current day Colts, right? And more specifically, comparing Frank Reich and Shane Steichen directly as head coaching candidates for this team. So I want to start by laying out some of the differences, which why we as Colts fans, why we should expect a different result under Steichen than we got under Reich. For starters, Reich had been fired from multiple positions and offenses that he was working in, right? When you talk about that 2-14 season in Indianapolis, he was a part of that. Then he goes to Arizona, immediately dismissed, right? And then when he takes over for Ken Wisenhunt, who was hired by the Titans after having the Chargers as a top 5 offense in football, they go in 3 years from that to Reich being fired because the Chargers were back to being a bottom feeder offense. Now, Shane Steichen, on the other hand, was never fired throughout any point in his coaching career. He was only promoted. You go back to 2013. I believe they were rocking. Someone fact check me. This is my football knowledge. They had, this is Jason Campbell, Brandon Weeden, and Brian Hoyer. Oh, I hope that's right. Jason Campbell, Brandon Weeden, and Brian Hoyer. And even though they stunk, those guys were performing halfway decent with Shane Steichen on the staff. So now he ends up going to the Chargers, and ends up getting promoted multiple times over. And when he left the Chargers, unlike Reich, he had the Chargers at the top offense in football. It wasn't the same circumstances. Reich was being fired. Shane Steichen was simply going to work with his guy, Nick Sirianni. So there have been no true failures yet for Shane Steichen as a coach in this league. Another difference is the fact that Shane Steichen and Reich clearly have a different demeanor, right? When you look at their personality, Shane Steichen is like a nice guy. They call him a player's coach, but maybe too nice, right? Maybe too nice. Maybe a player's coach, there's a difference, right? You want a guy that can be a player's coach but hold guys accountable. Shane Steichen seems much more accountability-based than Frank Reich, or at least so it seems right now, right? And then the third difference is that Shane Steichen was not the backup option for the Colts. It was pretty clear relatively early on that Shane Steichen, even before the Eagles had played the Super Bowl, that Shane Steichen was the guy for Indianapolis. That's a far cry from what we saw happen with Frank Reich. Again, the snake, Josh McDaniels. I fucking hate that guy. He was hired, and then it wasn't until after he ended up backing out of the job to go shine the shoes of his guy, Bill Belichick. He just couldn't leave him, right? That's when Frank Reich ended up coming in kind of as a hometown guy. He had worked on our staff before, the whole deal. We all liked the hire. Now, those are the differences. It's those three things that I personally believe are going to lead to different results. And of course, that doesn't include Andrew Luck, the retirement. Reich got a hard deal on that, whatever, right? But one thing I do want to raise, and I suppose I'm in an episode here on a negative note, I apologize, but I want to raise this as a potential red flag because I recently did an episode with the other half of this channel, my buddy Asif. He does the Eagles cast. If you so happen to find yourself here as an Eagles fan, you're going to love what he's doing. You could go check him out. But one thing he pointed out about the Eagles last year while we were talking, and to be honest, I had forgotten about this, but it was something that was being talked about in national news. This isn't being made up, right? Is that the Eagles were notoriously coming out slow offensively in the second half. And why does this worry me? Well, let me bring you back to last year when we got Matt Ryan. Well, for starters, the year before that, we had gotten Carson Wentz. I was not at all excited about Carson Wentz. I rooted for him because that's what I do. When you're an Indianapolis Colt, I root for you, right? When we got Matt Ryan, I was very, 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 I can't put enough very, so excited about Matt Ryan being the quarterback of this coach. But one thing in my brain, think about that Carson Wentz season. How many times did we blow a lead during that Carson Wentz season? So the one thing in my head when we got Matt Ryan, despite my excitement, was not for anything. It is a little ironic that we go from blowing a bunch of leads to getting the cover boy of blown leads as our quarterback in Matt Ryan, right? Mr. 28-3 himself. That was one thing I looked at going into that season. I said, I'll tell you, if this thing goes to shit, I'm going to think about this moment right here. And sure enough, it did go to shit, and we even blew that 33-0 lead against Minnesota. Was it 33-0? Might as well have been. Not my point. So with that, I can't help but feel just a little similar. And I hate to do this because I don't want to end on a negative note. That was a purely positive episode, but I can't help but feel a little similar about Shane Steichen. The offense coming out slow in the second half. The Colts, again, were a team that had problems with discipline and blowing leads and things of that, right? We just seem to be allergic to holding a lead. That slow start in the second half is something for us Colts fans to watch under Shane Steichen. But we can go back to the positive to end it. We're at the end of the episode, by the way, in case you're done here, right? But I am very, very excited about Shane Steichen. This is a very exciting time to be a Colts fan. I mean, we got the new quarterback, the new coach. This is everything you want in terms of optimism and hope. We have it all right now. So with that, thank you so much for sticking around to the end. Shoot a like, subscribe, whatever it is that you want to do to support the channel. I would be grateful for that. And of course, I'm in the comments section. You know I read all of them, man. And I'm responding to you guys because I love the discussion. So with that, until next time, this was the Ride in the Bench Colts cast. My name is Justin. I think I just said that backwards. But regardless, go Colts.